Welcome, everybody. I'll go over the guidelines as people are getting into the room to start a meeting. A lot of them, obviously, they haven't changed in a while, but I'll go over them. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Please do not unmute and mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you're on your phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Roisin Foley via the chat box at rfoley, R-F-O-L-E-Y, at ctps.org, or 857-702-3704. I'll go ahead and read the accessibility statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, again, please contact Roisin Foley from the NPO staff at rfoley, R-F-O-L-E-Y, at ctps.org, or 857-702-3704. All right, we are on our first agenda item, which is introduction. So, Jonathan, I assume you're going to do the roll?
Yes, I am. So, MassDOT Chair.
Steve Wolf, representing Secretary and CEO of MassDOT, Jamie Tesler.
Thank you. MassDOT DOT C2.
John Bouchard, representing Jonathan Gulliver.
Mass DOT Highway Division.
John Romano, Mass DOT Highway Division here.
MBTA.
Jillian Linnell, representing General Manager Steve Poftak.
Thank you. Massport.
Sarah Lee, representing Massport.
Thank you. MAPC.
Good morning, Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Thank you. MBTA Advisory Board. Oh, we couldn't hear you. No, I think you're having some audio issues, but I'll check you off as here. Amira. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins Advisory Council here.
City of Boston BTD.
Bill Conroy, City of Boston here, representing Michelle Wu.
Thank you. City of Boston BPDA.
Hi, Jim Fitzgerald with the BPDA, representing City of Boston and Michelle Wu, Mayor Michelle Wu. Sorry.
Thank you. At-large City of Everett.
Jay Monty, representing Mayor DeMaria and the City of Everett.
Thank you. At-large City of Newton.
David Kozis, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
At-large Town of Arlington.
Daniel Lamstutz, representing Town of Arlington, and Select Board Chair Steve DeCourcy.
At-large Town of Brookline.
Todd Green, representing Select Board Chair Heather Hamilton and the Town of Brookline.
Thank you. Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Good morning, Tom Bent, representing City of Somerville, Mayor Joe Curtatone in the Intercore.
Thank you. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton. Okay. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Thatcher Keyser, representing Mayor Spicer, Framingham.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Nguyen for the North Shore Task Force and representing Mayor Cahill in the City of Beverly.
North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington. Okay, South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland. Southwest Area Planning Committee, Town of Medway. Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset River Regional Chamber.
Morning, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood, representing the Trick subregion.
Thank you. And our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, Ken Miller, Deputy Division Administrator, Federal Highway.
Thank you. And Federal Transit Administration. And if we could just go back, Mr. Chair, to the MBTA Advisory Board, I think Amira has fixed her audio issues.
Sure, absolutely. Go ahead.
Amira Patterson, representing the MBTA Advisory Board.
Thank you. That calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Welcome, everybody. We'll move on to agenda item 2, Chair's Report. I don't have much of a Chair's Report other than to remind folks that Moving Together is happening next week from December 7th, 8th, and 9th. Registration's been climbing last couple of days. We're almost at 100. So we will have a cap at some point. So please, if you're planning on going, please go ahead and register. So we can move on to the Executive Director's Report. Tegan?
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you had a wonderful holiday weekend or long weekend last weekend. And I also hope that you're staying warm and safe as we start December. I do want to make a note right up front that I will actually be leaving around 10:40 a.m. And so if there is something that might have been addressed to me, I suppose, then Annette Dempshire will be taking over. If you have not met her yet or don't know her, which I think most of you do, she oversees our MPO activities and other policy and planning activities. So she will take my place. Then I have a number of updates. First, I wanted to highlight that, as you may have seen, I sent an email with some information about the bipartisan infrastructure law. And recently, the Federal Highway Administration launched a website. And we'll put the link in the chat. You may have seen it already, but just in case, it includes the presentation and materials that I sent to you last week that I forwarded from FHWA. But now there's more there that you can explore. And then I also wanted to remind folks that after this meeting, we have a focus group to discuss scenario planning ideas with board members. And those scenario planning ideas are related to our long-range transportation planning process. So it will be at 12:30, and there's a link to register for the meeting, the Zoom meeting, on the MPO calendar page. If you haven't already, please feel free to sign up and join us. And we'll also have a tool that we'll share afterwards to have you all provide written feedback if you're not able to attend the focus group, or even if you are and you'd still like to provide written feedback. I have a number of updates around staffing. One is that we had been recruiting for a manager of outreach and communications, and we have had somebody accept that offer, and we'll share more information on that soon. We expect them to start in early January. We're also working on finalizing our selection for a public outreach coordinator. So we will be back up and actually be boosting our capacity in terms of our outreach and communications work very, very soon in the new year. We also have interviews ongoing for 2 positions that have closed, but we're still interviewing folks for a transportation planner data analyst, and also for a transportation planner that will also take over the UPWP program from Sandy as he moves on to do other work in the agency. And then just yesterday, we posted another new position, a manager of projects and applications. So please take a look and send great people our way. This person will work under Rebecca Morgan, who's our director of projects and partnerships, and they will directly oversee our staff that are working on primarily project work, but also some MPO work. But the staff who are using tools like our regional travel demand model and various other applications that we produce or that we use to deliver work to our partners in the MPO. So that closes on December 27th. Again, please send great people our way. A few other outreach highlights before I move on to today's agenda. One is that we have one more coffee chat scheduled for the transit working group. This one is on COVID recovery. I know it still seems uncertain when recovery might happen exactly, but still I think it'll be a really great conversation. That's coming up on December 9th at 1:00 p.m. But look for more in the future. We'll be listing those events, including the one upcoming, at our transit working group webpage, which hopefully also will get posted in the chat. And if you're not on the mailing list for this group and you want to be, please reach out to Sandy Johnston. Also, we have released the Community Connections Program applications. They were released back on November 22nd. There are links for applications to each project type, as well as links to program guidance, budget forms, lots of stuff to help facilitate folks' applications to the Community Connections Program, and it's all on the NPO website. And the deadline for that is Friday, December 17th. And then our final outreach highlight is that we have one final sub-regional meeting that we are planning to attend on December 14th at the North Suburban Planning Council sub-region. These are the events we attend with MEPC, who facilitate these. And at those meetings, we discuss the MPO funding opportunities, study ideas, technical assistance opportunities, and needs that can be incorporated into our long-range transportation planning process. So if you're in that region, again, please attend. Please encourage others to attend and give us some input. So today, first of all, our meeting was preceded by a congestion management process committee meeting, which will be reported on later in the agenda. We do have one action item on the agenda, which is a work scope, an MPO funded work scope on travel demand management, or TDM follow-up. Sandy Johnston will present that. And then we will have 3 presentations on work that we carried out last year for the MPO. One is Betsy Harvey presenting A Decade of Blue Bikes in the Boston region, and that's about the expansion of blue bikes in EJ communities or environmental justice communities. And then Blake Acton will present our guidebook on the future of the curb phase 2. And then Jonathan Church will present how we have updated the all hazards application for the MPO. And then lastly, Mr. Chair, for the next meeting, just to give you a teaser of tentative topics, we will likely have a few more work scopes for you to approve, including future of the curb phase 3 and an MBTA DIDB policy update. And then we'll also ask you likely to release for public comment the first amendment to this current TIP, the federal fiscal year 22 to 26 TIP. And we also hope to have a presentation on hazardous cargoes on core area roadways. And that is it, Mr. Chair. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Tegan? All right, seeing none, thank you, Tegan. We'll move on to agenda item 4, public comments. Are there any members of the public would like to address the MPO today? Okay. All right, why don't we move to agenda item 5, our committee chairs report. Are there any reports from any committee chairs that would like to be made? Jay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Congestion Management Committee met today, and we heard from Ryan Hicks of CTPS on the bicycle parking study at MBTA stations. So I believe he may be presenting this to the full body at some point, as well as making these recommendations to the MBTA. We also had a follow-up discussion on membership, and it does look like we have a couple of prospective members on the committee, but still looking for probably 1 or 2 more as well. So if anybody is interested, please do reach out to myself or Mark Abbott. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Jay? All right, seeing none, thank you, Jay. We'll move on to agenda item 6, which is Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, we have not had a meeting since our last meeting, last MPO meeting, but our next meeting will be on the 8th, and at that meeting we will have Colette Frank, Select Board Member in Wellesley, and their Executive Director Megan Job to talk with us about their experiences with their RTA, and we'll also have Bill Cutner, who will give a presentation to us. It'll be probably his last to the advisory board before he retires. And along the lines of RTA, RTAs, I am looking to get a lot more information on them and understand, how MassDOT has worked with them, because I know that there is nothing new with respect to issues in transportation for MassDOT. And so I have some questions. I have some ideas of people who I'm going to reach out to, but if you're in the audience, and you would like to talk with me and maybe set up something in the future with the advisory board, advisory council, please feel free to reach out to me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Leonard? Seeing none, thank you, Leonard. We will move on to agenda item 7, which is an action item, MPO meeting minutes for October 21st of 2021. Can I get a motion in a second? And then I'll open up to any questions or comments or changes. Eric.
Yes, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the October 21st MPO meeting.
Daniel.
I will second that.
All right.
We lost you, Steve.
Sorry. I didn't touch anything. I swear to God, it just popped up like that. Jay, go ahead.
Sorry, I just raised my hand for the roll call.
Oh, all right. So Jonathan, why don't you read the roll then?
Okay, Stephen Wolfle.
Yes.
Great. I also want to announce that both Melissa Tentakoulis and Peter Pelletier have joined us during the last presentation, so I'll include them in the roll. John Bouchard.
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell.
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Amira Patterson.
Amira Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy.
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain.
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, yes.
Thatcher Keyser.
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Nguyen.
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Melissa Tentakoulis.
Yes, here.
Peter Pelletier.
Peter Pelletier, yes.
And Tom O'Rourke.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is another action item, which is a work scope on travel demand management follow-up. Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I am here to present the work scope for federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP task 13311, otherwise known as travel demand management follow-up. This is a $10,000 scope for which I will serve as the project manager and Jonathan Church as project principal. The scope document and calendar and budget exhibits are posted to the meeting calendar. So I'll just give a little background on the scope. Over the past several years, we at MPO staff have heard from numerous regional stakeholders that they have interest in the MPO engaging with travel demand management, or TDM. TDM essentially consists of a set of policies or programs intended to reduce driving alone trips. During federal fiscal year 2021, we sponsored 2 virtual forums about TDM. One in February on TDM in a post-COVID world, which admittedly we might have jumped the gun a bit on that topic, and another on September 30th about TDM with an equity lens. Both forums were very well attended, drawing over 300 participants combined. Based on continuing interest in the topic from stakeholders and the success of the forums, the UPWP committee and the MPO chose to fund this 2022 task with the specific purpose of examining what roles the MPO and its staff could potentially choose to take on in TDM in the future. The task has 3 primary elements. First, we will research how other MPOs engage with TDM, focusing on MPOs that are comparable to this one. We'll conduct a brief literature review and interview staff from some of those MPOs. Second, we will continue building and deepening our relationships with regional stakeholders. This includes municipal planners, especially those in more suburban areas where towns may have less staff capacity to engage with TDM, transportation management associations, and other interested parties. We also plan to hold at least one open house style public-facing event to give those stakeholders and the public a chance to give feedback. Finally, toward the end of the fiscal year, we will report back on findings to the MPO. We expect to write a short memorandum summarizing findings for both the review of other MPOs and the stakeholder engagement, and make a presentation to this board. At that time, we will also present recommendations about ways the MPO could be productively involved in TDM based on that feedback and research, if we do identify any, and ask for the MPO's guidance on how to proceed in federal fiscal year 23 and beyond. It's likely that the findings from the study and the MPO's guidance at that presentation will be included in the upcoming LRTP Destination 2050. We expect work on this task to proceed through the rest of the fiscal year, making it a 10-month study. If we have the capability to accelerate the work such that the conclusions can influence development of the fiscal year 23 UPWP, we will. And as I mentioned at the top, this is a $10,000 study funded by the MPO's joint 3CPL Section 5303 contract. At this time, I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Once all questions have been answered, I would ask for your approval of this work scope.
All right, anyone would like to make a motion second to approve this work scope? Leonard,
I'll be happy to make the motion, Mr. Chair, but I also have a question for
Yeah.
Mr. Johnson.
yeah, let's just get the second, Leonard, and I'll come right
Sure.
back to you. Peter, I think Peter was muted, right?
Oh, sorry. I will second that motion.
All right, Leonard, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Johnson, will this possibly incorporate RTAs? Because you did mention TMAs. I mean, so would they factor in, or are they completely not a part of this?
No, they absolutely could. Typically in the Boston region, TDM is handled through municipalities and TMAs, but obviously some of the potential benefits from TDM about raising funds or operating new service could involve the RTAs. So I think that involving the RTAs in this conversation is a really good idea.
Great. And with respect to outreach to other planners, meaning other stakeholders, please feel free to incorporate the advisory council into that search and that outreach. That's part of our mandate. And if we want to target a couple of municipalities that we aren't hearing from, we'll be happy to work with you, because we can work on increasing our membership at the same time. So thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely be happy to present to the advisory council and engage you all in helping to reach other folks.
Thanks. Welcome.
All right, anyone else have any questions? All right, seeing none. Jonathan, you want to read the roll?
Sure. Stephen Wolfle,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Mira Patterson,
Amira Patterson, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Conroy,
Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Thatcher Keyser,
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
Melissa Tentakoulis,
Melissa Tentakoulis votes yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sandy. We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is a decade of blue bikes in the Boston region. Betsy, take it over, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I am going to present today the results of a small study conducted under the Transportation Equity Program that looked at how access to blue bike stations has changed for environmental justice populations since this first started operating in 2011. My former colleague Ariel Patterson initiated this project, and I took it over when she left CTPS for another job in September. So the product of this work is a story map, a decade of blue bikes in the Boston region, which you can see on this, which you can see a link to in the MPO meeting calendar and as well in the chat. The story map traces the history of blue bikes in the Boston region and the distribution over time of stations and communities with high shares of people of color and people with low incomes, referred to collectively as environmental justice or EJ populations. So I'm going to talk today about some of the key findings. The story map starts with a brief overview of bike sharing and the history of blue bikes, and then moves on to analysis results, which consist of 2 parts. First, we have a series of 3 maps that show blue bikes in stations overlaid on communities where there is a high percentage of the population who identifies people of color and or who have low incomes that are greater than the MPO's regional average. On the map, the purple shows where both population groups exceed the regional average, and the orange shows where one of the 2 groups exceeds the regional average. This first map is for 2011. The second map shows the same data for 2016, and the third in 2021. And you can see that the little blue dots on the screen are the blue bike stations as they've expanded. And we can see visually that as that has happened, it has done so in communities where there are many people of color and people with low incomes. So the second part of the analysis identifies number and percent of people with low incomes and color who lived within 1/4 or 1/2 miles of blue bike station, again in 2011, 2016, and 2021. So I only looked at the population who lived within the municipalities that were participating in blue bikes in each of those 3 years. So the results show, as of 2021, that more than 50% of the people of color or people with low incomes live within 1/4 mile of the station. That's the blue part. The 1/4 mile is the blue part of the bar. And then more than 75% live within 1/2 mile. And so that's the full length of the bar, the blue and the red. So this compares favorably to the approximately 10% and 30% that lived within 1/4 and 1/2 mile, respectively, of the station in 2011. So this analysis, which looks at the proximity of where people live to blue bike stations, is just one of several ways to analyze access. It assumes that if a person lives near a station, they can use the bike, but it does not assess whether there are barriers to actually using the bicycle, such as cost, the presence or absence of safe bicycling infrastructure, and the usefulness of the bicycle or the bike share station to where they want to go. So while this type of analysis does not capture all the dimensions that make for an equitable bike share system, it does provide useful information about whether stations are located within a reasonable distance of people's homes where they may be expected to start and end their trips. Back in 2018, we did include a similar analysis in our long-range plan needs assessment. This project updates that analysis with new blue bikes data and adds a historical perspective going back to when Blue Bikes was initiated in 2011 under the name of Hubway. We anticipate that this project will again contribute to the next needs assessment. In addition, we anticipate updating the analysis with current census and American Community Survey data once the full set of data are released, which is currently set for March. Future updates could also include looking at the MPO's other equity populations, including seniors, people with disabilities, children, and people with limited English proficiency. So that sums up the results of this project, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments that you may have. Thank you.
All right, Darlene.
Sorry, I think my hand was still raised.
Oh, all right. All right, I'll go to Leonard then. Did you have a question, Darlene, or?
No, I didn't. That was from voting before, I think.
All right, okay. All right, Leonard, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ms. Harvey, is it possible to calculate statistical significance on these differences?
I don't, not 100% sure. I'm trying to think. So the statistically, the data, the blue bike stations are, there's they are what they are.
Right.
I'd have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Is there something in particular that you're interested in trying to understand?
Well, I just like to know if the differences are statistically significant, and the p-values, because it's like, because some of them you can tell, well, they're the same. Well, there's no difference. But in others where there's a little bit of separation, it'd be good to know if it were really meaningful. But it may not be possible to determine that. That's an okay answer. That's a fine answer. But if it is, it'd be nice to get it. If it wasn't too challenging to get it or too time consuming. So that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I guess that's helpful. I'm just kind of thinking about your question, and what we ideally, I think, you probably don't want to see any difference, right, between any particular population group. So it's not necessarily the same as some of the other analyses we've done of equity, such as the modeling, the disparate impact analysis, which is because it's forecasting, and it is reasonable to look at kind of statistical significance. I think this is a little bit different, and maybe that's not necessarily we probably don't want to see any difference, right, between any of them. And I think where we could kind of help to understand kind of the difference is using more updated census data and ACS once that data comes out. And I think that's potentially where we could get a little bit, the analysis could be updated in that way.
Right. Well, I agree. We don't want to see any difference, but if the difference isn't meaningful, let's say there's like a 3% difference, or maybe even a 5% difference, and the p-value comes in, relatively high, then we shouldn't really beat ourselves up for that difference, because it really wouldn't be significant if it were possible to do the calculation. So that's why I asked for it. But if it's not possible, it's just not possible. So that's all. Thanks.
All right, I can look into that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Anyone else have any questions for Betsy? I don't see anyone. Jonathan, do you see anyone?
No, I do not.
All right. Thank you, Betsy, for presenting on that study. We'll then move on to agenda item 10, which is managing curb space in the Boston Region Guidebook. Blake, you want to take it over?
Yes, sorry, this is my first time presenting, so I'm looking at, do I have control over the slides? Is that possible?
You should have control. You just need to click on the slide and then you should be able to advance them.
Oh, okay, I see the little arrows in the corner. They're quite small. All right. All right. So good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Blake, and I'm a planner in the Transit Analysis and Planning Group at CTPS, and I'm presenting the results of the Future of the Curb Phase 2 study, where we created a curb management guidebook for planners in our region. So with our guidebook, we aim to introduce and establish the practice of curb management by examining case studies, best practices, and challenges facing the region. But more importantly, we aspire to provide planners with realistic, practical strategies that they can use to more effectively manage curb space in their municipality. So we put together a detailed and comprehensive document, and we simply don't have the time to do it justice in a short presentation. So I'll briefly define some terms and summarize our interview findings, and then I will outline the 3 foundations of curb management. And finally, I'll discuss a few scenarios that show how planners can apply some of the strategies that we describe in our guidebook. So first of all, what is curb space? Curb space can be defined as roughly the area between the street curb and the roadway, typically inhabited by parking. This is an increasingly valuable space in the city, especially in more dense urban areas where it could be used as a travel lane, parking, deliveries, outdoor dining, or even as dedicated lanes for bikes or buses, or for both. Curb management seeks to find which of these uses most effectively serves the needs of the local community. And ideally, we aim to treat the space as a blank slate and reframe curb space away from the tradition that parking is the default and everything else is an alternative. However, in many cases, this approach isn't realistic since parking dominates most curb space in cities today. So for curb management strategies to be useful, they need to also acknowledge this reality. So to create our guidebook, we interviewed 27 different professionals, mostly comprised of municipal transportation planners. From our interviews, we learned that curb management is new to most planners and that today curbs are managed in a largely reactive ad hoc fashion. We also found a strong desire for practical strategies and ideas. So to start with the first foundation of curb management, we say it is to build a community coalition of allies that can help develop and accomplish curb management goals. This is important because curb space is so valuable with many different competing needs and priorities, and planners have little power on their own. By establishing committees and maintaining outreach, planners can identify issues, collect feedback, and promote projects and goals. We advise that planners develop a trusting relationship with local elected officials that can champion curb management efforts. Many curb management projects can be attractive to elected officials since they are small scale, affordable, but highly visible, allowing elected officials to impact their communities within the election cycle. Our second foundation of curb management is to develop a curb priority matrix that prioritizes the different curb uses within each land use according to the goals of the community. In this example, curb priority matrix, land uses are along the top and curb uses are represented within each cell. Within each land use column, the more suitable curb uses are ranked near the top. For example, in this matrix, the neighborhood commercial district there in the middle puts the highest priority curb use as activation of public space. This means that providing sufficient outdoor dining and parklet space in the neighborhood has the highest priority. It's important to note that the matrix shown here is merely an example of what one could look like. Each community's priority matrix will look different depending on the unique land uses and neighborhoods in that community. As municipalities develop their curb management plans, their matrix may evolve over time. Land uses may become more specific and eventually they could be accompanied by perhaps a map detailing the extent of each use. Our last foundation of curb management is to create a curb inventory or curb inventory database. This should be a searchable database with curb regulations by location and by time. Municipalities need to choose between in-house or vendors to develop their curb databases. Each option has its advantages and disadvantages, with in-house options offering more control, while vendor options allow for faster collection and more off-the-shelf analysis tools. Regardless, whichever option the municipality chooses, it's important that the database needs to be capable of answering simple questions, such as how many parking spaces are available on this block at 5 p.m., for example. Curbs change frequently, so ideally the database should be able to be updated on an ongoing basis in the field so that it doesn't get too out of date. All right, so now that we've established the three foundations of curb management, let's walk through a few scenarios of how planners could use the guidebook to address some more specific curb management issues. And we begin our scenarios with a parking study. We recommend that planners frequently begin with a comprehensive study of parking utilization, both on and off street, near their area of interest. Parking studies assist with many aspects of the curb management process. Planners can learn if, where, and when there is too much parking, where and when to focus price interventions as well. But more importantly, they can be used to find opportunities to replace underutilized parking with new curb uses. And finally, they help planners defend projects and proposals against what I refer to as the first law of curb management, that there is a continuous and pervasive perception that there is never enough parking. Okay, so after we do a parking study, we have a couple of different choices here that are presented. And we can, if parking is found to be less than 90%, this is where we would say is sort of the where opportunities exist for different curb space uses. And so we're going to walk through a few scenarios where different results happen from our from our parking study and see what we can do within those different outcomes. So in our first scenario, we find that parking is underutilized. It's less than 90%. And so there's a few spaces available on every block. And so we have an opportunity here to decrease the parking supply. And our curb priority matrix in this scenario shows that in this neighborhood, which is a neighborhood commercial district, this could be just a small corner commercial district with a few businesses. Perhaps this place is very nice to be outside, slow speed, low traffic, narrow roads, and this might be a fantastic place to build some more parklets or outdoor dining. And so in this first scenario, we simply replace a few of the parking spaces with parklets. In our second scenario, we have a very similar outcome. We have less than 90% utilization. So we find that once again, we can replace supply with something else according to our priority matrix. In this scenario, we're in the neighborhood connector neighborhood. And this could be defined as maybe a neighborhood that exists with a wide corridor with a lot of traffic, a lot of through travel. This perhaps connects to very busy origins and destinations within the city. And so here we prioritize movement of people and goods through that corridor. We want to maximize throughput. And so perhaps to do that, we decide that we want to build maybe a bus lane or a bike lane. And so in this scenario, let's go ahead and say that we're going to do a bus lane because we find that there's high transit ridership through this corridor and that it would benefit the most number of people and with the most efficient use of our curb use to transport goods and people through that corridor. But we naturally run into the problem where if we replace an entire linear corridor of parking, that's a lot more challenging of an issue than, let's say, if we were going to replace a few parking spaces, like with the scenario one with the parklet. So to address this issue, we recommend proposing perhaps a quick build as a strategy. Quick builds are small scale, fast, low cost temporary projects that demonstrate a new curb use without the risk of committing to a permanent change. In our case, we would build a bus lane with some simple traffic cones and signs. We can experiment with a bus lane while shortening the lengthy approval process since we're not building a permanent project. If the temporary bus lane doesn't work out, the cones can simply be removed. A critical component to a successful quick build is to include a plan to evaluate the impact of the project and collect feedback from the community. This data informs the next action. Should the project be removed? Should it be moved, adjusted, or perhaps the intervention is well received and we should replace it with a permanent bus lane? All right, so in our, here we go, in our last scenario, we find the opposite of our previous two scenarios, and we find that our parking utilization is very high. So we don't have a lot of parking availability, and we're looking at a downtown business district or like a CBD. And so in this scenario, we sort of have two different choices. The first choice is to increase the supply. It's not something that we want to specifically recommend. That's sort of the default option that most cities have done for the past probably 70 or so years, and the reason why we have so much parking in our cities today. But the alternative approach would be to increase the price of that parking. And if we do that, then we can change the demand for the parking so that perhaps there is more supply available and we're back to where we were before, where we now have less than 90% of parking utilization. And then just like with scenario 1 and 2, and under this ideal scenario, we can decrease the supply with some other higher priority curb use, just like before. But we run into sort of the practical problem of how do you increase the price of parking within a downtown business district? If it was so easy, then people would have done it a long time ago and we wouldn't be having this conversation. So we have a couple of different strategies that we recommend for approaching this difficult issue. So in this scenario, we recommend that planners approach the businesses within the business district early in the process so they can introduce the idea and attempt to address any concerns they may have. This can involve surveys and mailers, but the most effective method is to visit them in person. This demonstrates respect and helps develop a rapport. It also gives the planner a chance to set a constructive and civil tone before the business owner potentially develops their own perceptions from the news or through social media or rumor. After setting the tone, we recommend planners emphasize the benefits of increased parking turnover. Our parking study in this scenario shows low parking available supply, so visitors may avoid the area since they can't find enough parking, and drivers will generate more traffic as they search for open spaces. Introducing metered parking increases the vehicle turnover by incentivizing visitors to leave within a more reasonable time frame, leaving more spots open for more visitors. The result is more customers per hour for the business. Finally, we recommend planners consider introducing prices with a parking benefit district or a PBD. With a PBD, local parking revenue is reinvested back into the district. It's managed by a committee comprised of local stakeholders who can adjust prices and recommend policies and projects for that local revenue. District income can be reinvested into improvements such as new crosswalks, lighting, or street trees, which will enhance the attractiveness of the district and draw in more visitors, creating a virtuous cycle that leads to more parking revenue and ultimately more customers for those local businesses. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you for staying with me with my presentation, and I welcome any questions or comments you all may have.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Blake? Daniel, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation. I've been skimming over the guidebook as you've been talking, so and it looks really good. I really like the setup. I appreciate the call out to some of Arlington's work as well. A couple of comments or questions on the, I know you talked a bit about utilization, and then in the last slide you talked about turnover, and I think one thing that you know, I've just been working on some parking utilization or parking study basically, and using the MAPC's guidelines for like helping to collect that data, which is really useful. But I think one of the other important factors I think you kind of highlighted was turnover and how long people are staying. I think even if, you know, there's some locations in an area of Mass Ave we've been looking at where, you know, there's high utilization in a certain section, but it's because people are parking there for like 6 hours or 7 hours a day when they actually shouldn't be. So, I mean, the utilization is helpful, but I think the actual like rate of turnover is another really important factor in talking about like, well, is this really the highest and best use? And maybe that gives, you know, more support for doing some kind of, you know, a paid parking or metered parking because it's just not being turned over. People are just using it for storing their cars, and they may be, you know, employees of like local businesses. And I think that's another factor to point out is the sort of balancing between the local businesses need, like if they don't have off-street parking for their employees, they may need to figure that out otherwise, or use a side street that is so that, you know, customers can actually park on the street in front of the business instead of their employees for long periods of time. And this is like another just a technical question. I think, you know, the main when it comes of like demand exceeding supply, the number that I've usually heard about is 85% for, I expect, I guess, especially from like Donald Shoup, that 85% is really the number for when you, with that tipping point between where demand is exceeding supply, because that's sort of the, somebody could find a parking space relatively easily if only 85% is occupied at any one time. So I'm just wondering why you used 90% instead of 85, or where that number came from.
So I think Donald Shoup says a couple of different things over the decades. I think what he commonly says is like 1 or 2 available spaces on a block is sort of the guideline. And so that could be, you know, 1 or 2 could be kind of like 85 or 90. So somewhere within that range. I think maybe a more honest way to present this would be to say like about 85 or 90. It's not really a hard science. There's no formula for this. So either one I think is sufficient.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Ken, and then Schuster and Matt Warfield. So Ken, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Blake. It seems to be a very comprehensive and actually visually appealing document. And is it a just a digital document, or is it also going to be a hard copy document? Just curious.
It's currently digital. I suppose it could become
No,
physical.
no, not that. I'm just asking. Just a couple of questions. I noticed in the people that you interviewed, there was nobody from the freight community. Is that maybe not for lack of trying, but I would guess, but did you seek to, I would just encourage you to seek some input from freight community, whether that's small packages or other kinds of freight users.
Yeah, I do recognize that is a gap in our interview process. There's a lot of different people that we really could have interviewed, and looking back, we definitely should have tried to talk to some folks from freight. We did actually talk to some regional operations folks from Uber and Lyft. And so we got a little bit of that perspective from them, but it would have been helpful to reach out more to some of the other more formal freight providers. So I agree with you that in future studies, that should be something that we should address.
Great, thank you. And then also on, there are no page numbers, but but there was a place you were talking about these applications that people can use to inventory curb to curb. And it seemed like you talked about these proprietary applications, and it seemed that it almost was to the point that you seem to be recommending a particular one. And I'm not sure that that's entirely appropriate. Maybe that's just the way I read it, but I think I would just urge you to be careful when you're talking about proprietary packages, and seemingly to endorse anything. And then finally, did you think about maybe I just missed it, think about the relationship of on-street parking and off-street parking, and whether that has an effect on how these decisions get made?
To address your first concern, I think this is sort of an inherently touchy topic. I think there's going to be a lot of different things that we can't really make everyone happy when we make recommendations, and there could be some language maybe that we don't want to specifically endorse something, but we want to focus on trying to provide practical advice. And so, like with the curb inventory, doing an in-house inventory is going to be difficult for a lot of municipalities to do. And so we don't want to paint a picture that it's super simple and easy to just dive in and make that happen. And then on the vendor approach, we already have an example where we have a specific vendor that's becoming quite popular in the region with multiple different cities contracting with them. So we wanted to note that that's happening. We're not specifically endorsing a vendor. We just want to report that that's the case. But we will say that with Future of the Curb Phase 3, we're going to dive a little bit more into the data collection process. And I think one of the goals we have with this next study is to try to help bridge the gap with the in-house data collection option to make that an easier choice for municipalities and sort of help them get started with doing their own data collection. So we recognize that as a gap. And what was your second concern? Was it off-street parking?
Yeah, just the relationship between on-street and off-street parking and how that would affect decisions.
Off-street parking is very challenging to integrate, but I think it is important to at least look at some off-street parking, especially if it's publicly available off-street parking, where like municipal garages or things like that, because there is a relationship between those two different parking inventories. In most cases, off-street parking is where most of the supply lives, but in some cases, that off-street parking is sort of hidden or is private, or sometimes that sort of gets in the way of doing some of this analysis. But really something that's important to note is that when MAPC did a parking study, and they found that a lot of that off-street parking, especially at residential complexes, tends to be very underutilized. And so you're sort of missing that bigger picture if you just ignore off-street parking, but it's also sort of impractical to assume that we can look at all the parking lots, right? So there's sort of a balance there.
I was just thinking in terms of, the issue of pricing also, in terms of pricing your on-street parking. I think we probably need to consider the price of, particularly in the downtown area, the price of off-street parking. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your questions and comments.
All right, Derek Schuster.
I just wanted to commend Blake and the CTPS staff that have worked on this research so far as guidebooks and deliverables come from these studies. This is tremendous, and I just wanted to recommend to any municipalities listening in on the meeting, or to any of the regional stakeholders that disseminate information out to the municipalities, that this guidebook really does present tools and how-tos, not only for curb projects that you might be seeking grant funding for. Certainly a lot of eligible grant programs that the state offers, as well as other public and private sources. But even for STIP programming, like CTPS's own Community Connections program, this is some useful how-to information for certain eligible project types that you can consider for STIP development moving forward. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear, not lost on any of the municipal stakeholders on the call. And good work once again.
Thank you, Derek. Appreciate it.
All right, Matthew.
Okay, thanks. I was muted. Hey, Blake, thanks for putting this together. I jumped in like pretty much partway through your presentation, so I missed a lot of it. But it's good to see that, we've been doing this work here in Boston for a while, and it's good to see that we are kind of right in line with what you're talking about, in some ways out in front of it. Question I have is what's really helpful as we start to look at some of these smaller commercial districts within the city is how we have conversations with businesses about making that change, from being unrestricted, unregulated parking to starting to put in more curb management strategies, particularly meters. It's one thing to show data, but it's another thing to have that delicate conversation. So I don't know, like, what this has been generations of the back and forth issue of what do we do about that. But I think having some sort of guidance or thoughts on that would be helpful. So for example, we're looking at an area here in Boston, and we actually did do a count of about 13 private off-street lots, just because we wanted to demonstrate the availability that actually existed to kind of counter that argument that there's no parking, with the idea that maybe we could help facilitate some private partnerships between either the Main Streets Group or the Business Association with some of these lot owners, particularly to provide parking for employees, because that becomes the question is, well, where are my employees going to park? And when it's like, well, your employees are parking on the street, which is why your customers can't find parking, which you're complaining about. So it's like this whole catch-22. But anyway, thanks for putting this together, and just wanted to make that comment.
Thank
All
you.
right. All right, now Tom, and then David Kozis.
Thank you. I just wanted to second what Matthew just said. Our experience in Somerville, this can be, a great plus positive for squares and different areas and for businesses, but it can also be very contentious also. And so the reach out to the businesses, especially if it's a square or like we have Broadway and long stretches where a lot of the businesses are more, people stop in there for convenience. They might drop off their dry cleaning, and what the businesses will complain about is if they lose that off-street parking, that's pretty much in front of their business. they're going to lose that customer. And because it's convenient for them to drive by, drop something, run in, run out, and go. And I think we've tried to work with that with like 15-minute only parking, things like that. But when areas are removed for bike lanes and bus lanes, it becomes problematic. So, again, I think it's so important to have that dialogue with the businesses in these areas so that they have a voice in the decision-making process, but also to be able to show them where, substitute parking would be, especially for employees. So, I wanted to thank the group for putting this together. It looks like it was really well done, and I'm going to be digging into it a lot more. Thank you.
All right, David.
Okay, great, thank you. So the use of the curb for in-street dining is really unique. Because the demand it's completely dependent on where the restaurant is, right? Regardless of the parking utilization nearby or down the street, the in-street space needs to be exactly where the restaurant is, or not at all. And I think some restaurants are lucky because they happen to be located right where parking is and, not at a bus stop or not at a corner or something. And, all this, it feels so, it's clearly very new for all of us. And I felt like it was all, ad hoc kind of last year. So I'm wondering if you Blake have a sense from all the interviews that you've done. Do you feel like official programs are starting to be developed by these communities? Have people mentioned that? Or is it still being done ad hoc? Do you have any sense of that?
I think that for a lot of communities, curbside dining and parklets was so new that during the pandemic, that was like their first go and their first try at it. And they learned a lot in that first go. A lot of folks had a hard time figuring out like how to build it, or where to get the materials. I mean, really like fundamental things that they have to figure out. And so I think that a lot of these communities have figured out some of those basics. And so I think a lot of them are ready to develop a more formal approach, sort of formalize it and develop those plans. But at the moment, I don't know if there are very many of those really formal plans outside of maybe, some of the inner core cities that had parklets before the pandemic. But that's, something I think that will evolve very quickly in the coming years.
Right. I mean, so that's something that we're working on in Newton, is starting now to build a program, and it would be really interesting for us and for other communities to get any kind of example that any other community in the region has, if they've been able to build their program already. So thank you, Blake.
Sure, thank you. That's definitely going to be more important.
All right, anyone else have any questions for Blake? Seeing none, thank you, Blake, for your presentation. Obviously, it was well received, so thank you. Why don't we move on to agenda item 11, all hazards planning application. Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Church, manager of the MPO activities group, and I'm here to talk about the completed all hazards application app. Give me just a second here. Thank you. This application was approved by the MPO at a work scope back in January of this year. And like the Blue Bikes project, this work was started by Ariel Patterson while she was still working for us at CTPS. Excuse me. The purpose of this application is to provide an online interactive tool which will help users identify various climate hazards relative to the Boston area's transportation network. The application was first conceptualized 10 years ago and in the Emergency Evacuation and Hazard Mitigation Mapping Project, funded in the FY 2010 UPWP. Since then, the climate change projections have become more accurate, and some of the information in the existing data layers were outdated. So as a field of climate resilient transportation planning continues to evolve, it is essential to incorporate the most up-to-date data sets in the application for better planning. So, excuse me. So for the agenda today, we'll be talking about a summary of the objectives, the overview of the technical approach we took, and the data and data sources, as well as a demonstration of the new app, and then I'll be taking any questions. So the objectives were to produce a new version of the All Hazards app and build it on a more up-to-date platform than what we currently have on the website. By doing so, we were able to incorporate the most up-to-date data, which we were not able to incorporate in the old app. And we would examine how the app can complement ongoing work for the MPO in the state, particularly in the areas of, as I mentioned, resiliency, but also for the TIP and for equity. The objectives for the technical approach were to use a modern cloud-based platform that would maximize ease of use, not only for the user, but also for staff in updating the data. That would simplify the process, and it would lower the technical barrier for any support staff that needed to do it, so that we didn't have to rely on special programming. So we chose an ArcGIS online selection for the platform. And the reference layers were based on a couple of data sources from MassGIS, where we used a base map that was a Google base 2. Non-transportation infrastructure was also included, such as facilities, fire stations, police stations, the like. MassDOT provided transportation infrastructure information, and then the CDPS provided sub-regional boundaries and TIP projects. What was added to the new app from the old app was the latest information that we had on sea level rise, which was developed by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the flood hazards from FEMA, and the hurricane surge inundation, which was developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The data update and refresh process, as I mentioned early on, was to minimize the cost of data updates. So the data was published, that is published by MassGIS and MassDOT, are web map services, web feature services that allow us to publish those updates automatically. So there's no cost to CTPS staff time or to the MPO. For CTPS data, the simple update process, we can upload new data and connect it to the app very easily, and it can be performed by any of the planning staff with no developer intervention required. So right now I'm going to show you a demonstration of the app. And what you'll see here on screen now is the current app that is on the website. And what I'll do is to show you how it looks. You can see graphically it's a bit out of date. And I will show you the hurricane surge, which will show, and we'll focus in on an area that everybody is very familiar with in downtown Boston, where, oops. Sorry about that. This is part of the reason that we updated the app, because the user friendliness is not as easy to do as it was with the new app. For crying out loud. You can see here that well, we'll show you. You can see obviously that from the old app, which wasn't working very well, but we'll go to the new app. You can see that this is a much more pleasing look to it, much more modern and easy to use. We're able to do a couple things differently here, that we're actually able to use an address finder where we're able to put in a specific location. We've included the list of layers in a certain order, where we include the critical facilities in a certain order, and then followed by the sub-regional and EJ communities here within this section, tip projects, and then the natural hazards, natural features pieces. So I will zoom into where I wanted to go. We can do it with a much more easier roll. And you can see that here we are within downtown Boston. The transportation building is here at Park Plaza. What we're able to do is we're able to click showing the hurricane surge. You can see that based on the various categories, the impact that will happen to the city and the area that will be affected from hurricane surge based on the different categories of those hurricanes. We can then overlay this with the environmental justice neighborhoods. We're also able to add a couple things such as transparency, where we're able to really define the level of transparency for the hurricane surge levels. And that way we're able to get a better readout of the layers that are underneath, which we couldn't do with the old app before. The other piece that we've included here were the flood zones. The flood zones show where the impacts would be. And again, this is overlaid with the environmental justice neighborhoods. But you can see that once again, we can do the transparency for this. We can either make it lighter or darker as part of that to help define the map. The information at the beginning of the pieces, hospitals, town halls, colleges, universities, those are areas, police stations, those are things that we included, but we wanted to make sure that this was tied in with the tip process. And if I extend out a bit, you can see that all of the tip projects in the region are now on a point-based system, whereas before they were line work. And now they are much easier to see, and they're done by category of mode type. So we have intersection, and arterial, major highway, bridges, transit, and bicycle and pedestrian. And you can see that throughout the whole region. Here they are there. And if we add the sub-regions, you're able to see how that impacts within the whole region. So this is our new app. We wanted to present it today as an update to our interactive tools from the old app. And based upon that, with the MPO's presentation today, we hope to make it live later today. Thank you.
All right, does folks have questions for Jonathan? Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jonathan, and to CTPS staff for getting this new tool up and running. I think it's fantastic. Just asked that, if you could share the link to it so I can share it with colleagues, et cetera.
Sure.
So we can make sure people can get great utilization of it. Thanks.
All right, anyone else have anything for Jonathan? I assume everyone is fine with the CTPS going ahead and putting this up on the website and launching it. Anyone disagree?
Steve.
All right, I think we're good then, Jonathan.
Okay,
all right,
thank you, everyone.
Jonathan. All right, so we will move to agenda item 12, which is other business. I believe, isn't that correct, Jonathan?
Yes, it is.
All right, anyone have any other business for the MPO today? All right, it looks like we're done for the day. Can I get a motion and second to adjourn, please? Eric.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Peter.
I will second that motion.
All right, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in a couple weeks.